Okay, I have a update for all of you on some of the president's outreach and engagement as it relates to Build Back Better and his legislative agenda. He spent the weekend continuing his deep engagement on behalf of his economic growth agenda for the middle class, speaking with members who represent the full spectrum of views of Hill Democrats about the pathway forward on both his human infrastructure and physical infrastructure plans. He spoke, as I think some of you reported this morning, with Representative Jayapal at the White House, and we'll have a number of additional conversations by phone with members of both chambers and who also run the gamut in terms of their views as we proceed through the course of the afternoon. Tomorrow, he will host two different meetings with House members here at the White House, one with moderates and one with progressive members. We're encouraged by the accelerated pace of talks and are eager to get this done to meet the urgent needs of families who have been contending with high costs, outdated physical infrastructure, the increasingly devastating threat of climate change, and a tax system that gives special treatment to the rich and corporations at the expense of middle-class families, no matter how hard they work. As you also saw, we also announced this morning that on Wednesday, the president will travel to Scranton, Pennsylvania, going back home, some might say, to continue to rally support for his bipartisan infrastructure deal and Build Back Better agenda. There continues to be strong, broad agreement in Congress and among Americans of all stripes, political stripes, about the values at the core of the president's agenda, ensuring our economy works for the middle class, not just those at the top. Alex, why don't you kick us off?
Two foreign and one on nominations. To start, can you update us on the status of the U.S. and Canadian missionaries that were kidnapped in Haiti over the weekend? What's been the U.S. involvement in tracking them down? Has the president been briefed on this? And is there any update on sort of their status?
Sure. The president has been briefed and is receiving regular updates on what the State Department and the FBI are doing to bring these individuals home safely. The FBI is part of a coordinated U.S. government effort to get the U.S. citizens involved to safety. Due to operational considerations, we're not going to go into too much detail on that, but can confirm their engagement. And the U.S. Embassy in Port-au-Prince is coordinating with local authorities and providing assistance to the families to resolve the situation. We can't get into too many details, I should say, about the individuals and their identities because of Privacy Act waiver considerations.
And then can you comment on reports that China tested a nuclear-capable hypersonic missile over the summer to the surprise of U.S. officials? Are these accurate, and do these raise concerns about China's nuclear capabilities?
Well, I know Secretary Austin, I should say, was asked this question this morning and addressed it, but I'm not going to comment on the specific report. I can say and would echo what he said, which is generally speaking, we've made clear our concern about the military capabilities that the PRC continues to pursue. And we have been consistent in our approach with China. We welcome stiff competition, but we do not want that competition to veer into conflict, and that is certainly what we convey privately as well.
And then on nominees, the Biden administration at this point has a smaller percentage of nominees confirmed than his recent predecessors. What do you make of this? Who's to blame? I mean, is this the fault of the Senate, or is this in part because you have been focused on the COVID response and the Build Back Better agenda? And is there a concern that this will affect government at this point?
We are concerned about the obstruction of our nominees, and while we have made progress over the course of the last several months, back to the transition even of putting forward qualified nominees to serve in key and vital positions across government, there have been unprecedented delays, obstruction, holds on qualified individuals from Republicans in the Senate. What is also true, if you look historically, and we can get you some numbers on this after the briefing to give this to you in more data specifics, is that many of our nominees, a huge number of our nominees, pass with overwhelming majorities of Democrats and Republicans. They can be voted through by unanimous consent. You don't need to use all of the hours on the floor to get it done. Yet, there has been time after time obstruction that has prevented qualified nominees from being in vital positions, whether it's in the national security roles, in the Defense Department, the State Department, where we've seen ambassadors held for weeks and months at times, or even our economic nominees who are unquestionably qualified but have been unable to move forward and serve in these positions. So I would say that the blame is clear. It is frustrating. It is something that we wish would move forward more quickly, and there is historical precedent, of course, of moving these forward through a faster process. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. I just want to see if you can elaborate a little bit on something you just said, that you're encouraged by the accelerated pace of talks on infrastructure. What changed? Is there something that's different now?
The president is certainly feeling an urgency to move things forward, to get things done. I think you've seen that urgency echoed by members on the Hill who agree that time is not unending here, and we are eager to move forward with a unified path to deliver for the American people.
Does the sense of urgency have anything to do with the president's trip coming up in just a matter of 8 working days? Does he feel the need to get this wrapped before he leaves?
The good news is that there are phones and video conference capabilities overseas for every president and individual, so I'm not here to set new deadlines or timelines. But it is also true that we have been at this for some time. The president proposed these plans back in the spring. He has participated in dozens and dozens of calls, of meetings, of engagements with members to hear their viewpoints, to understand where they're coming from, to reach consensus. And we are at a point where we feel an urgency to move things forward, and the pickup of meetings is a reflection of that.
Just quickly on voting rights, I just wanted to get your reaction to the president of the NAACP, who's on the record saying that the administration's lack of urgency on this issue is quote, appalling. He says the lack of priority on this issue will be the undoing of the legacy for this president.
Well, I would say that the lack of urgency in Congress, in the Senate, among Republicans, in protecting people's fundamental right to vote is also frustrating to the president and to this administration. The United States Senate needs to act to protect the sacred right to vote, which is under unrelenting assault. No question. We agree with leaders from the NAACP and other activists who have expressed that concern. It's under unprecedented assault by proponents of the big lie and Republican legislatures, state legislatures across the country. It is urgent. Senate Democrats have been working hard to draft legislation that I would note includes traditionally bipartisan provisions, protecting people's fundamental right, making it easier and more accessible to vote. I'd also note the president will be engaging in a couple of calls, in addition to these Build Back Better calls, with members, which will provide a readout to all of you on this afternoon about the voting rights legislation that will be put forward. But I would say that right now, the question for us, and I bet you we share this view with a number of civil rights leaders, is for Senate Republicans and what kind of leaders they want to be. Are they going to play a role in making it easier and more accessible to vote? Are they going to protect this fundamental right? Or are they going to continue to be obstreperous, to use a word the president has used in the past, and put Democrats in a position where there is no alternative but to find another path forward? So it's really up to them. These are bipartisan proposals that have had bipartisan support. We're talking about people's fundamental rights. Go ahead.
Does the president feel the need to mediate the current war of words between Senators Manchin and Sanders we've seen play out?
To mediate the war of words, I would say the president has been in touch with both senators, not to mediate words, but to better understand the path forward and what are priorities to each of them. And he will continue to play that role.
And then 2 quick ones on policy. Senator Manchin has been pretty clear about his position or opposition to a clean energy standard for a while now publicly. Presumably that's given your team time to try and figure out workarounds to that. Does the president still believe he can meet his emissions goals if a clean energy standard or CEPP is not in his final proposal?
Well, President Biden has been clear about what he supports. 100% clean power by 2035 is a goal he committed to over a year ago. As you all know, is why I think you're asking about it, and he remains committed to it. The good news is there are a range of good ideas and proposals out there from members of Congress about how this legislation can help meet that goal. And there's no question in our minds, there's important debating right now happening about what the components of the climate proposals will be in these packages, that these packages will have a historic impact on addressing our climate crisis. I'd also note, can I say one more thing? I'd also note that the president also has not waited for legislation. He has led the shift toward electric vehicles. There are components in these packages that also will help move that forward. Phased out super pollutants like HFCs to greatly reduce emissions. Made across government investments in clean energy like offshore wind and solar, made historic commitments to use every lever at his disposal to advance environmental justice and spur economic opportunity. So it is absolutely pivotal that these pieces of legislation have climate components, and they will, to address the climate crisis, but he has also not waited for that. He's also taken actions of his own accord.
And then one more, one of the critical pay-fors in the package is tax enforcement, and we've discussed this a couple times the last couple of weeks, but given the scale of the ramp-up we've seen from the banking industry in opposition to the proposal you've laid out, what's the sense from the White House in terms of the pushback against that, or if they're concerned about the future of that proposal?
Well, it should not be lost on anyone that the loudest opposition to these proposals and the biggest ad spending against them is from the biggest banks who simply do not want to be bothered by additional reporting on inflows and outflows. That should not be lost. We can certainly get you the numbers, or it's publicly available out there, on how much money is being spent and how vocal this opposition is. I would note that the top 1% is responsible for $163 billion a year in owed but unpaid taxes. So this proposal we're talking about is about preventing high-income individuals who are not typical wage earners, meaning they don't get paid through standard payroll, W-2s. The vast majority, I think it's something like 97% of wage earners, are paying the taxes they owe. We're not talking about that here. We're talking about the highest income individuals, 1%, who are responsible for $163 billion a year in owed but unpaid taxes. There are discussions, active discussions, I would note, with Senator Wyden and others in Congress about how to ensure this is absolutely targeted at those who evade tax obligations, including on the cap and potential exemptions. But let's be clear what this is about. It's about big banks deciding to protect wealthiest Americans that get away with not paying the taxes they owe by fighting this common sense solution, and we want to be clear about that.
Go ahead. I wanted to ask you about Moderna and the kind of concerns that exist on production levels. What is the Biden administration doing to sort of lean on this company? And Kessler has talked about using the tools that are available. Are you going to use the Defense Production Act, and how soon could that happen, and how quickly could that get production going?
I don't have any new actions to preview for you, but what I can, and I think what you were alluding to, but for others who didn't see, Dr. Kessler did not mince words in his expression of what Moderna should be doing here, which is sharing their know-how with other parts of the world in order to increase capacity and production, something that we definitely support. So the process of technology transfers, as you know, involves teaching another company how to make a vaccine that takes specialized scientists and transferring intellectual property. We actually absolutely want that to happen. But my understanding is also that the U.S. government does not have the ability to compel Moderna to take certain actions, but it is something we support, we want to happen, and Dr. Kessler has been quite vocal about it as well.
Is the president going to get involved in this discussion in any way in terms of maybe reaching out to the CEO? He's had conversations with other CEOs, of course.
I don't have anything to preview on that front. I think there had been some questions, which is why I mentioned that we don't have the legal ability to compel. That doesn't change regardless of who's having the conversation, but certainly we have been pretty crystal clear about what we'd like to see happen here.
Let me just follow up on that. The Defense Production Act does give you certain tools. Have you ruled out using it in this case?
I'm not here to announce, preview, or rule out anything, but just to convey that our position continues to be that we would like to see them share their know-how to address this global pandemic.
Can I just ask on the nominations question?
Yeah.
You mentioned the economic nominees, too.
Yeah.
To what extent does it hurt you that you don't have key Treasury nominees in place to help you as you're addressing these questions that we're discussing now in terms of the economic impact of the measures that are in the legislation?
You mean in implementing measures once they're passed into law?
Right. I mean, you don't have the assistant secretary for legislative affairs. You don't,
Right.
There are certain people for policy. The sort of key policy makers at Treasury who would be advising Secretary Yellen are not in place. Does it hurt you in your effort to move forward?
Well, Andre, I think there's no question first that there are career employees in every agency, including the Department of Treasury, who have vast experience and play vital roles at this moment in time. It is also true that the preference of any president is to have the individuals they've nominated, qualified individuals who have unquestionable credentials serving in these roles. That is the preference. That does make things easier. Then that is what we would like to see moving forward. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. There is a mask requirement inside DC restaurants, yet President Biden and the First Lady were not wearing masks while walking around a DC restaurant on Saturday. Why?
Well, I think what we were referring to is a photo of them walking out of a restaurant after they had eaten, masks in hand, where they had not yet put them back on yet. So I would say, of course, there are moments when we all don't put masks back on as quickly as we should. But I don't think we should lose the forest through the trees here, and that our objective here is to get more people vaccinated, make sure that that schools and companies around the country can put in place requirements to save more lives and keep people safer. And not overly focus on moments in time that don't reflect overarching policy.
It was not just exiting the restaurant, though. He was walking through the restaurant with no mask on. There is a carve out for people under 2 or people who are actively eating or drinking. So I'm just curious why the president was doing this.
I think I just addressed it, Peter.
Okay. Why did the president break his promise not to enter into any decisions about what cases the Justice Department should bring and not bring?
How did he break his promise?
Well, he was asked if the DOJ should prosecute people who defied January 6th committee subpoenas, and he did not say, I will let the Justice Department decide. He said, yes.
Well, let me reiterate, and I put out a statement also on Friday night on this, where I conveyed clearly that, one, the president continues to believe that January 6th was one of the darkest days in our democracy. He also continues to believe that the Department of Justice has the purview and the independence to make decisions about prosecutions. And that continues to be his view, and that continues to be how he will govern.
You say that is his view, but that is not what he said.
I just conveyed what his view is, and that is also how he has operated, how he has governed, and how he will continue to govern. And I think that's what's important for people to watch.
So then what's changed since last year when he said, I will not do what this president, former President Trump does, and use the Justice Department as my vehicle to insist that something happened?
Well, since you give me the opportunity here, former President Trump used his office to incite an insurrection. He put political pressure on senior DOJ officials to propagate lies about the election to the point where they threatened to resign en masse. I think there's hardly a comparison there.
But he said, President Biden said, the Justice Department in my administration will be totally independent of me. And he said he would not enter into any decisions about what cases the agency would bring and not bring. How is that not exactly what
he has
doing?
not, and he will not. And criminal
About
prosecutions
prosecutions,
are their
he said
sole
he wants it to
purview.
happen.
Criminal prosecutions are the sole purview of the Department of Justice. That is the president's position. That is what he nominated the Attorney General to operate under. That is exactly what the Attorney General is doing, and those are the actions that people can watch from this administration.
As the public reflects on the life of Colin Powell and his public service, people are also now aware that he had a breakthrough case of COVID in addition to cancer and had some vulnerabilities. Because he was fully vaccinated and got COVID that took his life, any concerns about how that will be interpreted publicly, or how does that affect the message from the White House about the importance of vaccinations?
Well, as people saw in the statement issued by the president, a very personal statement about his personal relationship, this is obviously a heartbreaking tragedy for the country, and one the president is feeling personally. There are extremely rare cases of deaths or hospitalizations among fully vaccinated individuals. That has been the case even before the death of Colin Powell, especially among older people over a certain age, and people who have underlying health issues or people who are battling other diseases. That has been the case. It is also the case, and this is important for people to know and understand out there who are concerned, that an unvaccinated person has a more than 10 times greater risk of dying from COVID-19 compared to a fully vaccinated person. So there's no question that vaccination, that taking precautions can save lives. It is still true. And this raised that, certainly the death of Colin Powell, that underlying health issues, fighting other diseases, is something that can lead to greater risk.